Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Testing. You hear me okay? Yep. Great. Thanks, Pablo. So I've been given the go-ahead. Welcome, everyone. I know people are still coming in, but before we start, we have to go through some housekeeping. So here are some code of conduct in the meeting room. And I will have to read these points out. Let's go through them. So the first point is, please make sure your device, whether you're on a laptop or a PC computer or mobile phone, have a stable internet connection. Well, hopefully we all do. Second point, please use in the Zoom room. Please follow this format to name your name, right? Name_stakeholder. So for me, it should be Adrian Wen. Technical, right? So without the organization. Okay. The third point, please turn off or mute your microphone during this session. Well, if you're not speaking, obviously, right? So the fourth point, participants are not expected to leave or join the meeting room. Well, yeah, so the fifth point, participants are expected to turn your camera on and use a virtual background that can be downloaded from the chat box. So it's been shared with us by the operator already. So if you need help, just say it in the chat. I'm sure we'll get help here. And then the committee have the rights to expel participants from the meeting room if any of you violate the rules and act inappropriately, like spamming, like inappropriate picture or background, I'll be introducing our speakers today. Let me start by introducing Mr. Jeff Houston. Jeff is Chief Scientist at APNIC, so one of the 5 regional internet registries in the world. So Jeff undertakes research on topics associated with internet infrastructure, associated with IT technology, and address distribution policy. He's one eminent researcher on IPv4 exhaustion, among many others. Jeff has a really long, really remarkable CV. I'm not going to read everything out, I can't. So please welcome Jeff Houston. Moving on, let me introduce Farha Diba. Farha is a senior sales engineer for Novacom. Farha is based in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So she has been quite active in internet governance activities for a few years now. She has received fellowships to attend, for instance, APNIC 44, INSIC, so the India School of Internet Governance 2018, and was one of the panelists of Youth IGF Bangladesh in 2018, Asia Pacific Regional IGF Fellow, and Asia Pacific Regional IGF Youth IGF Fellow, right? So welcome, Farha. Moving on to Mr. Jeff Payne. Jeff Payne is Managing Director of Asia Internet Coalition, a leading industry body that promotes smart regulatory reforms for the digital economy. Singapore, Jeffrey stated in Singapore's 25 years experience at leading multinational companies like Visa, Microsoft, Reuters, and the Royal Bank of Canada. Welcome, Jeff. Yeah. And then moving on to Subkeep Chuck.
Thank you very much.
Executive Director.
Adrian.
Executive Director of the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, a human rights organization working for the promotion and protection of political and civil rights in Cambodia. As one of the country's most prominent human rights advocates, Subkeep's work has been recognized by the former US President Barack Obama, among many of her achievements. Yeah, so Subkeep holds a master's degree in international peace studies from the International University of Japan. So she also runs a blog. So if you want to know more about her, please reach out to her. Welcome, Subkeep.
Thank you.
And
good morning,
on to me. My name is Adrian Wan. I work in the Internet Society, so where we promote an internet that is open, global, secure, and trustworthy. You'll hear more about that in a moment. Okay, done with the introductions, and I think we are ready to move to presentation. But before that, let me say, so as you can see, we have the chat room open. We will have time for Q&A after our presentations. But as soon as you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be following them. And if the question is not from me, I'll be raising them to our speakers as well. So, but if you want to raise them by speaking, you can wait until the Q&A discussion. That'd be much appreciated. Great. So let's begin. And I'll be passing the mic to Jeff Houston. Hey there, Jeff, can you share your screen?
Certainly can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. And hopefully you can see that shared screen as well. Yes? Thank you. I see you nodding. Okay. Good afternoon, good morning all. It's a pleasure to be here. This is actually a session about the elements of the infrastructure of the internet. And oddly enough, although we've used the term the internet over the last 30 odd years now, it isn't been the same thing across that 30 odd years. Things have changed an awful lot. And what we talk about infrastructure today is not what we used to talk about it, say, for example, in the 1980s. Because way back then, when we were just getting started with packet networks, it was a very, very different network. The computers were the size of, rooms. Mainframe computers were big. And they did everything. And so the network was merely just a transmission fabric. It just pushed packets from computer to computer. Everything else in the internet, everything, was performed on these mainframe computers. So these computers were both server and client, and we all logged into them one way or another. But, inexorably, the march of progress and silicon got smaller and faster. And what happened was the mainframes disappeared, and we saw the rise of the so-called personal computer. But we didn't put everything into that computer. Oddly enough, we kept some functions away and put them into computers that were sort of on the network side of the boundary. So the entire naming system of the internet, what we refer to as the DNS, actually became a property of the network, and those computers that actually served that function were basically viewed by the rest of us as part and parcel of the network. Similarly, the computers that performed direction of packets, the routing system, was again pulled into computers that were dedicated inside the network. Clients, the computers that were attached at the edge, your personal computer, my personal computer, we didn't have to care. So all of these services were mapped into the network, and we actually created an entirely different internet, the so-called client-server network architecture, where clients were at the edge and servers were sitting inside the network. And the entire network was completely asymmetric. But it didn't stop there. It was never going to stop. And by the time 2000 came along, we were expanding the internet in almost every direction at once. The number of internet service providers just blossomed out into thousands. And the ways to get packets from one service provider network to another started to get more and more complicated. And so we started to set up IXP or Internet Exchange Points between ISPs to actually pass the packets across through local switching fabrics. We had peering points and meet me rooms and co-location facilities, and various countries even mucked around with the concept of gateways. Inside the ISP network, there was all kinds of tiering going on. The folk who ran intercontinental systems, including undersea cables and satellite, we called them Tier 1 ISPs. At any point, even today, there are only a handful of them, about 4 or 5. There was a rich fabric of interconnection. There were many ways to get between 2 points on the network, so we spent a lot of time doing transit and traffic engineering, trying to find not only the fastest way to get between A and B, but the cheapest way to get between A and B. And pretty soon we actually found that mainframe computers that sort of handled a whole bunch of service really needed to scale up. And the only way we could do that was to actually build dedicated facilities that simply housed servers. And so this was the advent of the data center and the service farm. Inside all of that also came quality of service engineering and a whole bunch of ideas around MPLS, label switching, around virtual private networks, around enterprise systems, and all of these ideas where one underlying network actually served many different customers for many different reasons with many different responses. And we tried to put that all into one internet. We also found dedicated last mile networks, customer access networks, which started out as dial-up modems, went through DSL, and these days there's an awful lot of fibre being complemented by a huge amount of 4G and more lately 5G mobile access systems, which is merely just this sort of last mile network to connect customers up into this infrastructure. But at the same time we've been working at the edge, we've been working in the middle. And there's this new beast, it's about 10 years old now, the content distribution network, which is very, very quickly taking over the entire internet one way and another. And this now sort of drives everything. So why is infrastructure changing? What are we trying to do? Well, I actually think we're trying to actually answer the 4 big criteria about what the internet needs to be today and tomorrow. It's got to be bigger. And we've been astonishingly successful. Fibre optic cables now use photonic amplifiers, and we're getting terabits a second out of a single strand of fibre. And so where we used to talk about megabits or gigabits, we're now talking literally petabits of data working across terabit per second transfer facilities. So the fibre folk have certainly met their KPIs, and fibre just gets fatter and fatter and fatter. But even that's not enough. Inside the silicon that drives the network, we're going into link aggregation, where you can put 4 or 5 circuits between the same 2 points and splay the traffic across each of those individual transmission systems to actually get more capacity out. Content is now no longer in a computer. It's in a lot of computers all the time. And so what we have now is that when I go to Google, I'll exercise a server somewhere close to me. When you go to Google, wherever you might be, a different server will get exercised servicing that same data to you, because there is just so many folk accessing this. All of a sudden, that content is smeared across huge farms of service spread all over the world. We get bigger through parallelization, and that's what we've been working with. Not the least of which, of course, is 4G and 5G in mobile. And so big has been a theme in the last 10 years. And the network today carries literally 100 times more data than the network of even 5 years ago. And that just hasn't stopped. The network might not have expanded exponentially, but the volume of data it's shipping certainly has. And one thing that's almost critical here is that instead of packets traversing the network, we try and limit their distance. To make things big, we make the packet go as short as possible. So content's now served from the edge, not from somewhere else. Now, that's actually really important because that gives us our next goal, making things faster. Distance, as Einstein told us more than 100 years ago, was it then? Might have been less than 100. Let's say around the 20s. Nothing moves faster than the speed of light. So no matter where we are in the world, the further we are apart from each other, the longer it takes to communicate. So if you want the network to go faster, move the 2 points together. And so we've been pushing content right out to the edge of the network to cozy up to where it gets delivered to. That's quick. At the same time, to make this work and to replicate that content at the edge, this is the rise of these content distribution networks. Now, faster means also that the packet miles, the amount of miles to deliver packets to users, has shrunk incredibly. So now we've got shorter distances and higher capacity, but that's not enough. We're actually re-engineering our applications to get faster and faster and faster. We're actually pulling a huge amount of the protocol functions that used to be smeared across the DNS and part of the security system. So there'd be a number of exchanges before we actually got to deliver content. The work over the last 3 years in engineering, 1 is a good number. 2 is a little bit wasteful. We're trying to sort of collapse all that interaction into short, sharp, and effective. And applications are now just simply getting faster. And so we're compressing what goes on in these protocols to get faster speed from the point at which you click to the point at which the content is delivered onto your screen. So faster has been a massive factor. But as well as that, we're getting better. Now, when I say better, I actually mean it in quite a particular way. Not only more trustworthy, I'm going to where I intended to go, but more privacy. Fewer people could see me. We've managed in the wonderful world of the web to almost encrypt everywhere. And TLS with 1.3 is sealing up the last of that open porthole, the server name indication field. If you sit on the wire or you sit and look at mobile networks through the air and try and eavesdrop, you will see nothing. Literally nothing. We're using oblivious techniques in both the DNS and in the web delivery system to actually isolate knowledge of who's asking what questions from even the providers of infrastructure. Nobody can tell anymore. And what we actually find is across the entire internet, almost every player, content application and platform sectors, have all taken this agenda up with massive enthusiasm. And oddly enough, it actually doesn't matter whether the network is trustworthy anymore. Who cares? Because everything that travels across the network is encrypted, and the amount of data leakage is now getting very close to zero. So sure, you tap my wire, but it won't make any difference. You will still see nothing. Now, you'd think all of that would be expensive because this is what we've been dreaming of for a century in communications, but it's not. It's dirt cheap, and we're actually making it cheaper. Computing and communications capacity is now just simply by unit price getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It's abundant, and there are also massive economies of scale. And oddly enough, we don't pay for this. Google's free. Most of these services, Facebook and so on, are free. How are they free? Well, oddly enough, what's going on is that the folk who are providing these services are capitalizing an asset that you and I find it very hard to sell, our profile. But if I take all of these individual profiles, which I can't sell, you can't sell, and group them together, I can sell them to advertisers. By grouping them, I create a collective asset that is worth billions of dollars today. And so what you find is the giants of this world, particularly in the area of Facebook and Google, are basically advertising networks working off the idea that they're selling goods and materials that, oddly enough, individuals can't sell. They can't capitalize them themselves. The end result is that this astonishing network is actually affordable by everyone and actually available to almost everyone. We've transformed this luxury into not only a mass market commodity service, but a ubiquitous and affordable mass market commodity service. Now, great, huh? This is terrific. What could possibly go wrong? It's all good. So in the last couple of seconds, I'm going to leave you with some quite provocative questions, and they get worse as we move on. So the first one, if all content is coming out of content distribution networks and packets aren't traversing the internet anymore, who cares about transit? Who builds submarine cables? And the hint is, Google and Facebook build them. Telcos don't anymore. Public data's disappeared. What about peering? Irrelevant. What about exchanges? Irrelevant. What about gateways? What about sort of pulling together all the traffic that leaves the country? Well, if the CDNs are in your country, none of it leaves your country. There's nothing to leave. So all of these things we used to talk about don't matter anymore. They're just not relevant to today's infrastructure. They're all heading inexorably to valueless irrelevance because we're building a different network. Can I see your traffic? No. No and no. In this world where applications are now actually sealing up the gaps and using comprehensive end-to-end encryption, it doesn't matter if you can see the network, you're not going to see what I do. The internet is now opaque in such a diversity of ways that watching my packets will give you nothing, absolutely nothing, and that's the intention. So all of a sudden, I am very, very hard to see by anybody, no matter how well equipped they are. And that's what we wanted. And so this whole idea of channeling traffic through inspection points, nothing to see. It's not worth doing it. And what happened to the public communications infrastructure of the telcos? Gone. Does anyone care? Evidently not, because it's gone and no one's crying. It's over. Now, what if you didn't like that? What if you thought, hang on a second, this is going the wrong way. Can we stop this? Oh, gee, I think that conversation's come and gone, and the answer is no. Can you drive away digital services? The Australian government at times has had its fights with Google and lost. Spain, lost. Various other countries. France is still struggling and it's not winning because, quite frankly, these companies are not only big but inexorable in the way they manage technology. And national services are now totally reliant on this digital environment. So in some ways, you can't really exert control over something that's controlling you. We should all use government-mandated crypto. Yeah, right, go away, not going to work. I think Kazakhstan is the latest one that tried this, and the results are abysmal. What about this uncomfortable feeling that many economies, and some major ones in our world, have noticed that their internet is totally reliant on other people who aren't in their country? This internet is astonishingly interconnected and interreliant. Can you cut the chain? Can you create a national sort of network infrastructure that isn't critically reliant on everyone else? Good question you might want to think about. Because I think we've gone somewhere that realistically has taken on its own momentum. This is not the telco world. This is not a public sector activity which is highly regulated. It's a private sector market activity that has taken on its own momentum, and it's moved way outside of what we thought of the historic forms of national regulation and control. They just don't work anymore. And so when we think about those four questions, what you've got to think about is that in the context of this massive private sector momentum that's behind it, that's driving all of this. So those are my thoughts for this afternoon. I hope you found them interesting. And I'll hand you back to Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. A lot of food for thought and really intriguing questions for later on. Thanks a lot. Moving on to our second presentation. Let's welcome Faha. You're on mute, Faha.
Audible now?
Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Arjun. So you have already introduced us. Let me present my presentation. So at first, please, I'm not a really good speaker, so I'm a bit of nervous. So pardon me for that. And my presentation is basically for the non-tech people who really don't know how the internet works. So yes, let's start. So this is a very common scenario of the internet. Down and for internet, it's a really huge issue. So how the internet actually works and how we exchange the data from somewhere else. So at first we can see every country has internet gateway. So internet gateway mainly exchanges traffic from different cable systems, and then from internet gateway to it goes to ISP, and from ISP to LSP, and LSP to end user. Basically, sometimes it can goes to ISP directly, from ISG to ISP directly, and then to end user like us. We can use the internet through this infrastructure. And another thing is the cable system can be monopoly, or it can have multiple cable systems. But I think nowadays most of countries have the multiple cable system. So here it is. So I mean, how we an internet exchange point is where the data actually any traffic exchange just from their nature, peer to peer, they come together to peer exchange from traffic between their natures. And internet exchange point is not really internet service provider. Basically, they want to peer with another network and connect to the internet exchange point. So, actually, the internet is very before we use the internet, how we exchange our data. We exchange our data to, for example, your friend lives in, I'm living in Dhaka, my friend lives in Singapore. How can I data to my friends. So it is like the previous system post uh, uh, previously we send through letter we send our data. So so here is a small animation which I made for everyone. So actually it is like the previous system, but it is developed day by day. But you know, we have already know it. So let's see the animation. So here we can see where change is sent later. So here, you know, it's like it seems like how have a holding number, like we have an IP address, so we have ISP, so we can using these ISPs, and we can thought this is the internet gateway. So this is how we exchange our data through internet. But problem is when someone setting a surveillance, like here, if the post office say the data, so this is a huge problem. We don't want someone read our data, right? So 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 nowadays, the issues we are facing, internet shutdown so many times, and switching is a very common thing. So this is a funny thing. It is really people don't want to see other people to get their data, you know, monitoring. So this is how the VPN works, and uh, now uh, we have a common trait, like some countries have a common trait like national internet gateway. So it is a huge problem. Um, uh, Actually, few countries set up the national internet gateway, and they, but it has some drawbacks like performance, reliability, resilience. So, you know, if you are going to uh, send all your data through one exchange point, which will be selected by government. So basically, you have to set a huge, uh, good, very costlier device on that. So it would be a performance issue, reliability issue is like some bad guys can shut down or steal the whole, internet uh, of a country. So I think this is not okay. Like national internet gateway, and okay. So every country has telecommunication regulatory. Like every country, in my country we have a telecom regulator. Its name is BTRC. So what actually they do, they provide the license like IIG, Internet Service Provider, local service provider. They set the policies, set the charges, set the how much bandwidth issues, and they also set the frequencies like for microwave or uh, any kind of frequency when time when the data exchange um, through a wireless network. It can be licensed or it can be unlicensed, and they also maintain what traffic types. So many countries, you can send the VoIP traffic. I mean, the voice from basically in my country, the voice traffic is not legal. So when someone asks for us that we want to transmit this, so it is basically, uh, our operator, our regulator basically said this. So this diagram actually is like how as a user, if I ask someone to have a internet connection to my office or my house, so how it just provides. So here we can see from data center, then it goes to IIG, then IIG to ISP. So, from ISP to end user, we can provide it to protected connection, or actually this is a protected connection through fiber and radio. And another thing is you can give a linear connection to radio to radio. I mean wireless to wireless. This is called basically point-to-point network, and you can send the data. I mean you can have a only fiber connection. So basically, in my country, what happens if the end user take the usually the linear connection. So this is point-to-point network, and this is point-to-multipoint wireless network. I mean, from a single, this is really very expensive point-to-point connection because you are using one access point to another access point. But what is if you want to use from the one access point to many access points? So this is really required. So this is how actually we give the wireless connection, and fiber connection is really normal. I think that's it. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I'm really bad at public speaking.
Thank you, Faha, for sharing your thoughts on internet infrastructure and telling us a bit about what an IXP is, what an international gateway does, right? So thanks a lot for. I mean, I'm really nervous too. Maybe you can't tell, but thank you for trying your best. Yeah. So moving on to my presentation. So let me start. Oops. Sorry. Where is it? Okay. Can I do a quick test? Does everyone see my shared screen okay? Yeah, good. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Sapir. So, before I start, I want to thank the organizers, Kominfo, the Indonesian Ministry of Communications and Informatics, and the IGF Indonesia. I'm hearing a background noise, my own voice. So am I the only one who's hearing this?
We hear the same.
Yeah?
Now
Okay.
it's okay. Now it's okay.
Yeah. Testing. All good? Okay, I'll go on. Thank you, operator. Again, thanks the organizers, Cominfo and IGF Indonesia for having the Internet Society and many of our friends and partners here today and yesterday. This is the first CIGF, and I can see it's a really successful event thanks to your work. So the topic of today is, the role of open and interoperable infrastructure in the Internet success. Before going to the topic, let me tell you a bit about the Internet Society. So, which is the organization I work for. Basically, if you haven't heard of the Internet Society before, and you need a one-liner to get to know us, it might be this. We believe that the Internet is for everyone, and we work towards reaching our vision by building, promoting, and defending a bigger and stronger Internet. Well, Jeff just now talked about a bigger, and stronger Internet too, like a more privacy protecting one, right? So we agree on a lot of those things, and we'll touch on those in a moment as well. So the Internet Society is a global nonprofit connecting and empowering communities to ensure the Internet remains open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy. So we have around more than 130 chapters around the world in over 125 countries, including one in Indonesia, Jakarta. In fact, if you look at the picture on the right, it is an event in Jakarta a few years ago, 2018. And you can see we were still using our old logo then. But if you want to know more about the chapter, there's a URL here, isoc.id. So I want to talk about the internet first. We all depend on the internet every day now. We might be using Google, Facebook, or even TikTok for some of you. So the internet has become an essential part of life in quite a relatively short period of time, in just a few decades. So which brings us to a question: why is it so successful? A team of us at the Internet Society started a project last year to understand a bit more about this question. The team was called the Internet Way of Networking, meaning to find out, what is it about this way of networking that makes it so special? Essentially, we wanted to find out what are the salient features of the internet that have led to its global success. Well, we believe knowing this and articulating the features will help us know what to protect about the internet and how to ensure a healthy evolution of the internet so that our future generations can continue to benefit from this life-changing technology for us all. Well, this is the internet is a bit like this. This is a really simplistic representation, right? I think many of you can find fault with this and see it as really like a comical representation. But the point is, it can help us show two distinct features about the internet in relation to our topic today. The first is, when you look at this, you can see many things. The first thing is, it seems open to new networks, and there is no central authority controlling who can or cannot be on the internet. So if you add a network on the fringe, you become part of this internet, right? The second thing is, it is a decentralized mesh network. It means that when one network goes down, other networks around it will not be, affected by it. They can still work. This contributes to the resilience of the internet that Faha and Jeff just talked about. Well, think about this. By extension, this also means that each network can make their own decision about which other networks to connect with, according to their own needs. So we worked out 5 distinct features about the internet that we call the critical properties of the internet way of networking. And these are the 5. Let's start from the top. Accessible infrastructure with a common protocol. The second one, open architecture of interoperable and reusable building blocks. Decentralized management and a distributed routing system. Common global identifiers. And lastly, technology neutral, general purpose network. Well, these are really technical terms, and you may not get what they mean at once. But each of them brings their own benefits to us. For instance, let me give you an example. For the first one, accessible infrastructure with a common protocol. It is about the fact that the network is open to anyone who wants to participate in it. You might be a consumer, an information provider, or an infrastructure builder. There is no central authority dictating who, how, and where connections are made. Well, the network can grow organically to support the needs of its users. So when this happens on a global scale, what we have is really a global internet infrastructure. What it means to users is that connecting to one point gives you access to the whole internet, right? No matter where you are. So there are no more agreements needed. Yeah. Let me spend a bit of time on the third point, decentralized management. So each of the internet networks, they make independent decisions about how to route traffic to its neighbors based on its own needs and local requirements. There is no central direction or controller dictating how and where connections are made, so that networks can grow organically, driven by local interests. Well, these might seem really abstract still. So let's give an example. We'll use the critical properties of the internet way of networking as a lens to study this example of Cambodia's national internet gateway. First, about the policy itself. So in February, the Cambodian government issued this sub-decree number 23 on the national internet gateway. You'll see this document on the right. That's the original one. Essentially, it requires all ISPs to reroute their services through a national internet gateway within the next 12 months by February 2022, which means in a few months' time. Its stated aims are to facilitate and manage internet connections for the enhancement of effective and efficient national revenue collection, protection of national security, and assurance of social order, culture, and tradition. It also requires ISPs to verify users' identities. Failure to connect networks to the gateway would result in their operating licenses being suspended and their bank accounts frozen. A bit more about the policy. So essentially, the National Internet Gateway will incorporate 2 things. The first thing, it's a domestic internet exchange, and the second, the International Internet Gateway. So essentially, think of the DIX, the Internet Exchange, being the national interconnection point for internet service providers in the country, whereas the IIG, the International Gateway, it carries internet protocol data in and out of the country, right? So there's a licensing system to be put in place by the regulator. And among other things, those licensed, the operators, they shall do many things. And among some of them are, they have to manage infrastructure at all national internet gateways. They have to connect or peer or exchange traffic with other NIG operators. They also have to work with the government to promote government revenue collection through e-commerce and other online services. They also have to work with the government to block and disconnect all network connections deemed to have negative impact on national revenue and the rest, right? So let's take a look at the topology or the diagram on the right. So it's from the original policy paper. Well, the original was in Cambodian language. But this is an official translation by Digital Reach. So on the left of the diagram, you'll see that red part is international. So once it enters Cambodia, it enters the territory of Cambodia, and it gets right onto a national internet gateway. And you can see there are a few points designated for now. 1, 2, 3, 4, and other locations, meaning both the DIX and the IIG must be operated in 4 places now. Phnom Penh, Sihanoukville, and a few others to be identified. So, well, a bit of a side point, but on the last point about helping the government to collect revenue, I mean, it doesn't say, the policy doesn't say how. How can an internet gateway help the government collect revenue, right? So it doesn't make it really clear, but I mean, so obviously we'll have to keep monitoring to see how they do this. But is there a danger of them asking content providers to pay them for using their infrastructure, like we see in some other countries, right? So it's something that might be concerning in the future. Let's look at this map here. The topology I showed just now stands in contrast to what the internet in Cambodia currently looks like, or at least in 2019. According to Khmer Times, a local newspaper, the lines on the map show the fiber optic backbones in 2019. Well, and the red lines show, internet speeds of 10 gigabytes per second, and the purple lines are slower speed. And the red arrows we see, they are the cross-border points, right? So, which means that, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 arrows here. So if we just, judge by this count, it probably means the number of points where internet traffic can cross border will decrease, right? So let's bring us back to this chart, this diagram. So let's think about this. How does the policy affect the internet? Let's try to apply this model to this example. Well, we think the policy impacts, 2 of the properties. And the first one is accessible infrastructure with a common protocol. And the third one being decentralized management and a distributed routing system. But let's go into the first one first. The fact that the national internet gateway operators has control over all international access means that no other network in the country is able to access the internet, the global internet, independently or directly. Essentially, the choke points will severely limit the access of Cambodian providers and internet users to the global internet. It creates a hierarchical network topology. Topology means a network layout, if you're not familiar with the term. So the hierarchical network structure and the tight control of a few centrally controlled international gateways, together they mean that the country interacts only with a subset of the global internet, but not the full internet. And given the rigid controls, networks cannot quickly respond to changing traffic. For instance, if there's a disaster, they have to follow whatever order has been given to them. They have to follow the same route, right? But in the rest of the world, in many places in the rest of the world, internet service providers can make instant decisions in response to events that impact their operation. So this results, you can argue this results in lower resilience. On the third point, we have to understand that the internet is a network of networks. So each network makes their own independent decision on how to route traffic to its neighbors, based on its own needs and local requirements. Again, I've said it a few times already, but there is no central direction or coordination dictating how and where connections are made, so that the network grows organically, driven by local interests. So what does it mean? It means since ISPs, internet service providers, must route their traffic through their national internet gateways, the policy centralizes and limits routing choices for internet service providers. This means the routing of traffic between networks will be less efficient than it could be, or at least compared with 2019 when we see if we believe in the map shown by Khmer Times, it could potentially affect network efficiency. Let's look at this illustration. The hierarchical network structure with the national internet gateway operators running the gateways will essentially be choke points for international access. That essentially means fewer options for interconnection. If you look at the red networks, meaning if these stop interconnecting, you'll have less choice. You'll have fewer options for interconnection. Well, you can see what happens when interconnection is further limited. Those in gray have, far fewer interconnection options than before. Having a few designated companies run the international internet gateways that funnel all the internet traffic in and out of the country creates this hierarchical network topology. That's really a move away from the mesh network that the internet is, but towards more like a tree network structure that has clear hierarchy, that severely impacts networks' global reach, and it potentially limits collaborative internetworking. So I just gave you some analysis based, looking at it from an infrastructure perspective, but there are many other considerations to be had. I mean, as mentioned already by some of my colleagues and two other speakers we will have later on, and they include let's consider the internet quality as a result of this policy. Does it affect affordability? What about security and privacy? Well, not to mention human rights, which we'll hear about in a moment. And I just want to say that, this policy comes at a time when Cambodia's industries, like e-commerce and fintech, they increasingly depend on the internet. Especially now, due to COVID-19, businesses are transforming how they do business. Again, our reliance on the internet is increasing by the day. The fact that this policy happens now essentially adds uncertainty for people and businesses who are considering Cambodia as a place for work, to live, and to do business. So that was an example of using the internet way of networking properties to look at a specific example, right? It shows that many of the potential benefits the internet brings, like it can bring us collaboration, like we are all enjoying it now, right? Like global reach and resilience. If these are not maximized, as a result of that policy, it is likely to be the average users in a country who are worse off because of this. And in terms of because of the considerations just now, not only because of infrastructure, but also like quality, affordability, right? That's why we think governments and policymakers in general should look at this line here. We think they should make decisions that, before they make decisions that change how the internet works, why don't we examine the potential impacts first? Many countries do impact assessment, for instance, for the environment, to evaluate whether the new road or new bridge or maybe the new airport will damage the environment. We think, let's apply a similar kind of thinking to the internet as well, because the internet is really an ecosystem. It's something we hope more policymakers will think about when they make relevant decisions. And impact assessment, not just for the environment, but also for the internet. Well, how am I doing on time? So I'm running out of time, so I won't go too much into this, but if you're interested in what we do and the properties I talked about just now, we have a lot of material on our website. Feel free to have a look. We have some infographic to help you understand what we're talking about. And really quickly, feel free to get involved in what we do. If you want to know more a bit about the internet way of networking and how the internet works, we have a free 4-week online course starting, the next round is starting in October, and it's offered 3 or 4 times a year. You can go to this website and register for the course. Yeah. And let me jump to the last point. Yeah. So you can use this framework to do your own analysis, and we can help. We would love, this framework being applied to more local situations. So if you're interested, again, get in touch and we'll be happy to help. Yeah. I want to thank everyone for listening. I'll be stop sharing now. Okay, great. Thank you for your kind words, Sopip. And I will share the mic to you, Sopip.
Thank you, Andreas. It is very comprehensive, and thanks for using Cambodia as a case study. I also learned a lot from the technology aspect. So I will not cover the technical part, but mostly it's the on the rights perspective. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let me make it bigger. Yeah, so
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your attention so far. I think there have been a lot of information to observe and a lot of things related to technology. For the, the gig, maybe you find it quite well, but for some, maybe it's a bit heavy. But let me move on with, like the question: why open and interoperable internet infrastructure is a key to the internet continued success. And following from Andren's presentation, it was helpful to understand how the infrastructure works. But we also need to understand the context that may involve with this infrastructure change or policy formulation. So first of all, let me share you briefly about how can I move this down? Okay. Show you about human rights situation briefly. So to some who may follow our situation, you may aware that in this few years, Cambodia have come across to a severe curtailment of the civic space. There have been a mass crackdown on civil society actor, with the dissolution of main opposition party, the crackdown on media, union or CSO at the same time. So it's really heavy for us since the election in 2018. So we have witnessed a lot of massive crackdown, and it has continued up to this point. And with the COVID situation, it makes things even further challenging. And mainly the fundamental freedom that including the freedom of expression, assembly and association are the key freedom that have been mostly affected or violated. So the government have introduced a number of restrictive legislation in combining with other, tactical violation to the fundamental freedom. So here, the regulation that the government have introduced that could restrict on the online democratic space would include the sub-degree on the establishment of a national gateway that Andren have elaborate and make a clear presentation on how the infrastructure may look like when the NIG would be set up. Up to this point, we have not been aware, whether this NIG have been already established, but the law have been adopted. So, the further step may come up, but due to the lack of transparency, we have not been aware much so far. But second law is the law on the measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and other serious, dangerous, and contagious disease, or in short, we call the Kovit-19 law. And I will just briefly go through this. For the NIG sub-degree that have been adopted early this year, just to add further from previous presentation, the new regulation is clearly a threat to freedom of expression online because it centralized the government control over all the internet connection. It also facilitates the mass surveillance of online activity. If you have access to read the sub-degree itself, you will see, how the government mandate the company to store the data, and also, the authority have the arbitrary, right to check all this information, and the company had to comply with it. And it also permits the blanket content blocking possible, if the government would not be happy with any, content. And it empowered the authority to order the government appointed NIG because operator to block or disconnect online connection or content that deem affect safety, national revenue, social order, dignity, culture, tradition, and custom. You have seen from Andrian's presentation already on this last point, you know, like there have been a clause that highlight the key purpose of the NIG establishment. The term, you know, like affect the social order, dignity, culture, tradition, and custom somehow have been a known kind of a copy and paste throughout many documents that the government introduced lately. And you know, like it's really vague. How are we to define certain activity would be affecting the dignity or culture or tradition? So it will open to arbitrary interpretation of the law itself. And this have been already taken place, you know, with a number of laws that you know mostly the government would just interpret according to their will to crack down on the fundamental freedom. And yes, here like I already mentioned, you know, the NIG operator is required to maintain the technical record and list of allocated IP address, compile and maintain a report, you know, concerning the connection and all internet traffic, and all of this information can be, you know, like have to provide to the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication as well as the Telecommunication Regulator of Cambodia. Anytime when they request from the company, and the company are obligated to comply to that requirement. And this will be heavy for the company to store all this technical record as well. And if I'm not wrong and I remember well, it seems like the company have to store the data for a year or so. Yeah, so in short, you know, the one NIG established, it will mostly likely lead to the you know, impermissible restriction of the freedom of expression online. And of course, you know, mostly the restriction would be targeted to the human rights defenders, journalists, or activists. In line with the COVID pandemic, you know, similar to other governments in the region, Cambodia have introduced two laws, including the state of emergency law last year. And for this year, the government, you know, instead of imposing the state of emergency law, the government have introduced another law called the Kovit-19 Law. And the law itself contains a number of provisions that could have a potential effect on the freedom of expression online. The law, you know, is written with very vague and ill-defined language. For example, you know, and also the punishment for violating the measure, COVID measure, you know, will be up to 20 years in jail, and it's really heavy. So this broad and vague terminology of COVID-19 law make it difficult for individuals to conform their behavior to the law itself. Here are examples, you know, like in Article 11, the COVID-19 law have outlawed that, you know, intentionally obstructing the implementation of COVID-19 measure, and provide for a prison sentence up to 5 years and a fine of up to 20 million real. And while on its face, the Article 11 does not restrict online freedom, but you know, there have been cases that the government have already used this provision to target the online speech. For example, a case in Siem Reap, you know, there have been a online journalist, it calls breaking news journalist based in Siem Reap. He was arrested by the military police because he published a Facebook post criticizing the Prime Minister leadership, as well as questioning the efficiency of the Chinese COVID-19 vaccine. And you know, like so So his critical comment have been result to a charge of incitement, and he have been sent to a pre-trial detention. In fact, another case, but it's not related to the COVID-19 law itself, but it was because the COVID pandemic situation. You know, like the Logan plantation of Cambodia have been heavily affected lately. So there have been a farmer who criticized, not criticized, he posted on Facebook to seek the intervention from the government, and just commenting that, you know, the government have not helped the farmer much, and that have resulted him to a 10-month imprisonment charge, you know, of incitement as well. And that is really, you know, something that I have already mentioned, that freedom of expression have been under threat heavily. And there have been other draft law that are pending, and it would be also affect the civic space. That would include the draft law on cybercrime. We have analyzed the law based on the leaked document. It also concerning, you know, there have been a lot of provision that it's not just about addressing the crime online, but it's really about, you know, the speech that can be affecting social order or culture, and, you know, like other concerning the use of you know, the platform itself. So if this and another law, the public order law, is also very broad. It covers the whole aspect of our daily operation, and it is really, you know, something concerning, because the public order itself have have restrict a number of freedom, including the women freedom to dress. You know, there have been a dress code requirement, like women should not wear revealing clothes, for example, and men should not, you know, come out public without wearing the shirt, you know, like without having a shirt on. So this is something really kind of, you know, like demanding, and you know, the culture have been used as the reason to justify for the law to be introduced. So, you know, aside from this legal development, as I said, you know, the fundamental freedom have been heavily affected in these 2 years. So at our office, the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, we have monitor the state of fundamental freedom, and this is the latest record that we have documented. You know, from April to December 2020, there have been 108 restriction or violation of the freedom of expression. There is a difference between the restriction and violence in our definition. The restriction can be permissible by international human rights standards, while you know, like when certain restrictions that are not permissible will lead to violation. So that's why you see the figure is 108 restriction or violation here that related to the freedom of expression cases. And among these 108, over 53% or 57 incidents are the case that happen with the online freedom of expression, meaning that individuals or activists have been arrested simply because of their opinion online. And a number of cases have been, you know, accused of incitement, and have been dismissed of their opinion because of the, you know, like fake news justification. Here you could see the case that I mentioned, about 53% of the restriction online. Mostly, you know, it affects with the online, with the expression through Facebook. In Cambodia, I think different from Indonesia, where I know, you know, Twitter is more popular, but in Cambodia, Facebook is more popular. So that's why you see a lot of cases of, you know, like restriction happening on Facebook. And TikTok is also become a trend. So there have been cases related with TikTok and YouTube as well. Like there have been a case that happening with with the online rapper, the artist who produce the rap music. And his music is very critical against the government. He mentioned about the social issue, the corruption, the failure of the government to address the poverty, etc. So that two young rappers have been arrested and accused of incitement, and they are in prison. And you could see, based on our public poll, the result point out that less than 1/3 of our public poll respondents feel free to exercise their freedom of expression on social media, and this trend have been declining from year to year. So from year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 2 here is back in 2007, 2018, 2019, and 2020. So only 28% of people that we were surveyed expressed that they feel free to express their opinion online. It's really low. And then for the CSO, the civil society organization and trade union leader, there have been a trend where they feel unsafe to impart information through social media as well. You could see the percentage have been increasing as well from year to year. There have been a heightened crackdown on freedom of expression online using and because of the pandemic, it even challenging because the government have introduced a new law, but also existing law like the penal code, like defamation or incitement, have been popularly used by the government to crack down on the dissent. Another point I want to point out is the lack of effective data protection. So to respond with the COVID situation, in late 2020, the government have allowed the local authority to reveal the identity of the COVID-19 patient. So they have revealed the photo, the name, and even the address of those people who have been tested positive, and to keep track of the contact person. And it has been heavily criticized by local CSO as well as the UN special reporter. But when it comes to this point, it's really kind of, how to say, because of the pandemic and the justification of the public health is really a populist approach by the government. So it makes it hard for us as a local activist to debate with the public. The public, when we have a position that, it's violating to people privacy right and their security as well. When the government reveal the photo, name, and address, the public don't understand this issue, but because the government have manipulated as well that it is necessary to reveal the information to keep track the COVID-19. So it's really challenging for us as an advocate to not only fight with the government, but to advocate with the public to understand the concept of privacy right versus the public health here. And also the government have introduced a stop COVID-19 QR code system. So like every time the government require like restaurant or public agency or even private agency to install a QR code node. So everyone who will enter into the building of those agencies have to imply that. So the government justified that the QR code is to keep track the COVID cases, but we are not sure how the data that collected through QR code would be used, and how privacy right will be protected, and how the data is stored. So here is example of how QR code have been placed in front of the any agency who are willing to follow the government rule. So when you enter to those buildings, you have to, like check in your location and your identity that you are visiting this building. So with all of this that I mentioned, it has resulted to the kind of low score of the freedom of expression, especially the freedom of the net. It is done by the Freedom House, where Cambodia have a rank of 43rd out of 100 score, and based on the World Press Freedom Index, Cambodia was ranked very very high here. It does not mean good. It's very low. It's mean 144 out of 180 country. Sorry. And then for the Internet Privacy Index, Cambodia was ranked 108 out of 110. It's only two countries behind. And so, we talk a lot of the problem. What could be the solution? The solution could be, need different stakeholders to involve. So first of all, is the Cambodian government who have the obligation to ensure the space will be protected. And second, business and civil society. And, like for the government, they have to review and discuss the NIG sub-degree. They should I like the idea that Andren have mentioned, doing the impact assessment, human rights impact assessment, how this policy will affect on the internet infrastructure and also other components like freedom, privacy, etc. And also, considering that any new law introduced have to comply to the international human rights standard. And yeah, for business, I think they have a power to act, to turn the situation around. Like tech companies need to resist to the government in order to shut down internet connectivity or online content when the government requests them to do so, or to pass data privacy to the government. So there have been an example, in December, late December, the Asia Internet Coalition have criticized the NIG in a press release, and the association have been cited of the arbitrary use, privacy right, and cybersecurity, and reuse internet speed that would damage the economy as a whole in their statement. So this is example how the company can play a role to speak up, but also to resist with the government order if it would happen that the government require information or to shut down connectivity. And for civil society, like us, we also have a role to play, is to stay informed of new piece of legislation, doing a proper analysis, and engage with the government when it's possible to advocate for the repeal or to amend necessary provision, and continue to raise public awareness. And we should form our network to lobby with the government for a better protection of digital rights and hold them accountable. Yes, so that's it of my presentation, and thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sapip. I'm glad you mentioned the Asia Internet Coalition, because that's Jeff Payne we're bringing up to us next. So over to you, Jeff. Hello, Jeff. Are you there? I may have to text him. Give me a second. I'm sorry. Apologies, everyone. So I've texted Jeff. I've not got a response yet, unfortunately. Right. Well, in that case, let's let's move on. Yeah. Unfortunately, we may have to miss Jeff's presentation. So, question time, right? So, if Jeff comes back, perhaps we'll have time for his presentation. But let's open the floor for questions. Does anyone have any question for Jeff Houston, for Farha, for me, for Subheap? Feel free to either type it in the chat or request for the right to unmute and say it to us. Any no question? Why don't I start off with one first? Yeah, I wanted to ask Jeff Houston. Jeff, so we talked about a bigger, better internet and stronger internet. I want to know how do you think how do you want the internet to be in the future? Say, 50 years is a really long time in internet terms, but do we have the sort of is there something we need to do to achieve that state, say, from 50 years from now? So, hi, Jeff Houston. We may have taken too long, and the Jeffs are gone. Unfortunately, yeah. Well, okay. No worries. In that case, any other questions for any of us? No. If not, I will let's close this meeting. And I want to thank everyone for spending time with us today and to listening to us. Unfortunately, we missed Jeff Payne, but I know he's prepared a lot for this presentation. I've seen his work, but he must have a really good reason. So, well, thank you everyone for coming. We'll be closing the presentation, the session now. Terima kasih. See you again.
Thank you so much, Andre, and everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thanks, Fahad. Bye.
Hey guys, you there?